Hello everyone, it's Terry here. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today I am sharing this card that I created using a stamp set from Gina K Designs. So let's get started. So the stamp set that I will be using for this card is called Perfect Poinsettias. It's a layering stamp, but for today's card I am only using the foliage and the leaves. To start off, I place a red cardstock in my MISTI platform. I want to create my own background, so I'm just selecting the foliage stamps and placing that onto my card. Before inking my stamps, I like using an anti-static powder bag. This helps prevent any unwanted embossing powders from sticking onto the card front. And since this is the first time I'm using the stamp set, I like to prime the stamps by rubbing it with my hands. I like doing this because it gives me a better impression. I will be embossing this card, so I am using Versamark ink to apply the ink onto my cardstock and using my tool to apply even pressure. I then went ahead and inked that a second time, making sure that there's a good impression on the cardstock. I am now applying Ranger's embossing powder in gold and gently knocking off the excess powder. When heat embossing, you want to make sure that your heat gun is nice and hot so that it can easily melt the embossing powder without warping the cardstock. To prevent the card from warping, I like to heat from the underside of the cardstock and move back and forth to the front. And now I'm just going to repeat the process until the entire card front is filled. I know this is terrible, but I do get a little lazy wiping my stamps. So what I like to do in between stamping is placing a sheet of plastic paper over my card front and aligning my stamps on top of that. This prevents the ink from the stamps from making contact with the cardstock. I am using a grid transparent sheet here, but you can pretty much use a plastic sheet from your stamp covers. When you're arranging the stamps on the card front, you want to make sure that the same stamp is not right next to each other. So I'm just alternating between the stamps. And here is the completed background. I love how this looks already. But I wanted to step it up a little bit. So using distressed oxides and ground espresso and black soot, I went ahead around the edges of the card front and blend that in with my blending brush. Since we embossed the images, the embossed areas is now resisting the ink. So what I like to do is using a craft rag, I buffed that off the top of my card front. I then went in and spritzed some clean water onto the card front. You can let it air dry or use a rag to help speed up the drying process. And of course, it's not a good day in my craft room unless one of my little ones are in here helping me. Here is my 2-year-old helping me clean my mess. Do you guys have a little craft buddy in your space? I would love to know. For the background, I felt like it was missing something, so I went ahead with my paints and splattered that onto my card front. Using a rectangle die from Divinity Designs, I cut and embossed the card front. I also went ahead and cut a white matting piece a little larger than the card front. I am using a black top folding card base that measures 11 inches by 4 1/4 inches. I scored that down at 5 1/2 inches. For the sentiment, I die cut the word piece 3 times out of black cardstock, and I also cut the shadow part out of vellum. I like layering the sentiment on top of one another because it gives the card a little dimension. To assemble everything together, I use liquid glue on the back of the card front and apply that onto the white cardstock. I then use foam tape and adhere that onto the black card base. I like adding foam tape wherever I possibly can because I love the dimensions that it gives to my card. I use liquid glue to adhere my sentiment down onto the cardstock, and then I use a heavy acrylic block to help apply pressure. Now, before applying my sentiment strip, I like to go over the edges with a black marker. And of course, I adhere that sentiment strip with foam tape. Using liquid adhesive, I went ahead and added gold embellishment to the card front. And lastly, I applied glossy accents to the piece sentiment. And here's the final card. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and please don't forget to subscribe and thumbs up. Have a wonderfully blessed day. Bye-bye.